And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So primary elections tend to be relatively uneventful. Voter turnout is typically low, and the candidates are starved for interesting storylines, usually. But this year that is not the case. The GOP primary for governor has been downright, well, it's been downright bizarre. And there is no real front runner in the five-way horse race for the Democratic Attorney General nod. The winner of that race will go on to face a Republican, Dan Donovan, just one of those guys. Now here once again to break down all of the political jockeying that is heading into next week's primary election are our very own insiders. Bob Bellafiore is a former press secretary to former Governor George Pataki. For the moment, he is still a senior partner at Eric Moore & Associates, but he is bound for the National Heritage Academies, a public charter school organization. And Steve Greenberg is a former press secretary to two former Assembly speakers. He is now the president of Greenberg Public Relations and a pollster for the Siena Research Institute. You got all that? Right. You guys, your titles are just getting longer and longer, all of these honorifics and...
So stop talking about it.
So just go to Bob and Steve. We can be on a first-name basis by now.
Oh, we can?
Sure.
Oh, great.
Just do Bob and Steve.
Okay, Bob and Steve. We always start with you. We'll start with you. Anyway, you're the Democrat. What did you think of last night's primary?
I thought it was very...
Primary debate, rather. I'm so anxious to get it over with that I'm already a week ahead of myself.
I thought it was very interesting. Look, this is I think you were right, what you said in the intro, that primaries are generally low turnout. This is going to be a very low turnout Democratic primary. I mean, I'm thinking that we're looking at maybe 12, 13, tops 15% of Democrats who are registered to vote in the state will actually come out and vote. So it really is playing to a very limited audience, one that is more liberal than the average Democrat. And I think that's part of what you saw last night and what you've seen throughout this Attorney General's campaign. They are each competing to try and get those activist Democrats, those primary voters, to appeal to them, and they're making arguments that would appeal to more liberal Democrats, which is going to make it more difficult for whoever comes out of that and then has to face Dan Donovan come in the 7 weeks leading up to the general election.
Yeah, I thought, now Eric Schneiderman has pronounced himself the front runner. He did that last week, actually. He was at a upstate Justice for Main Street tour, he's calling it. At one time we thought Kathleen Rice was the front runner because everybody thought that Andrew Cuomo wanted her because of her ticket balancing capability. I thought Eric Schneiderman played it very safe last night. Everybody came out swinging against him, and he did a lot of sort of ducking and jiving and rolling, and he was safe. I don't think he was very... I don't know, wasn't on fire.
He's got to feel pretty good about where he is given the constituency that tends to vote in the Democratic primary. He has rolled up the New York Times endorsement, which will help him in the upper east and west sides of Manhattan. He's gotten a lot of support from the traditional Democratic constituent groups, the kinds that can push turnout in a low unions in a low turn. You know, when you're talking about turnout in the teens, then if you've got organizations that can push people out, then that can be very valuable. So he's probably feeling like he's got a lead right now. But when you look at the polls, I mean, Steve, you know this better than I do, but if you look at the polls, each of the Democrats in the primary sort of look like the New York Mets offense. Everything is in the low single digits.
Yep.
There isn't a lot of name idea. I mean, poor Richard Brodsky, right? Has there ever been a bigger press hound than Richard Brodsky, right? The most dangerous place to be is between Richard and a New York Times reporter. So he's been cultivating the press for 25 years in Albany, and he's still in the single digits and can't seem to get traction in this race.
No question about it. Look, in all fairness, I know that the Capitol Tonight and the YNN viewers are among the more educated and the more politically knowledgeable. So I don't think that the debate really moved a lot of people, because I think the people who are watching the debate largely know who they're supporting in this election. This election is really going to be determined by turnout, as you were starting to say, Bob. Who can identify their voters and turn them out? Look, we have Sean Coffey is playing out this upstate strategy. Upstate Democrats only account for maybe a quarter of the total vote.
Well, but his argument is it worked for Mario Cuomo when he ran against Ed Koch in 1982. I mean, that's what his argument is. Is that not a good argument?
No, I think absolutely. But Mario Cuomo also played in the city. I mean, he didn't cede downstate to Ed Koch when they ran against each other in '82. No, I think what Sean Coffey is saying is, look, you got Rice and Schneiderman, the two front runners, fighting it out in New York City and on Long Island. I'm going to try and get a piece of that action. I'm going to go after those voters, but I'm going to focus my efforts upstate. And if I can dominate upstate, look, let's assume it's a 15% turnout.
That's high.
That's very high. All right, let's.
You're high.
Careful.
Really? I mean, really.
Let's assume.
Who invited this
I
guy?
don't know. Let's assume a 13% turnout. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Sure.
5.2 million Democrats in the state. If there's a 13% turnout, we're looking at somewhere around 650,000 Democratic voters coming to the polls. With a five-way race, you only need then 225,000 votes. So I think what Coffey's trying to do is say, if I can get a larger percentage upstate than those guys, compete downstate, maybe I can be in this race.
You know, Steve made this interesting point, and as the Republican in the room, I wonder if you would be so kind as to respond to it. It regards this issue of too liberal to beat Dan Donovan. Now, we should say Dan Donovan has been here with us, and he is doesn't come off as a raging conservative. However, there has been a remark that Eric Schneiderman made regarding the Reverend Al Sharpton, saying that his National Action Network would have an annex in Albany.
Yeah, right.
And I think I heard film being cut for a negative ad right then and there as the words came out of his mouth. I mean,
Right.
how much could that hurt him? And how do you walk away from something like
Look,
that?
I mean, Al Sharpton cuts both ways. He can deliver votes in the city because he's still seen within large parts of the liberal Democratic community as somebody who can move numbers of voters. But I still think he's a huge liability, especially in a law enforcement office. Here's a guy whose organization is tax delinquent to like millions of dollars to the federal government.
Yep.
How can he have how can a tax delinquent organization have an annex in the office of New York's chief law enforcement officer? Now, there's another point. The Mario Cuomo ran upstate. You know, all these elections have to be taken in context. When Cuomo won upstate against Koch, it was after Koch had stuck his foot in his mouth and kept it there, talking
In a
about
Playboy
upstate.
interview, actually.
Exactly, precisely.
Now we have hit
The one
marijuana and Playboy in
one
the
article
same
that was read in
insider
Playboy that
section.
And, you know, by saying that the people in upstate wore gingham dresses and you can't find any
That's
good
right.
Chinese food upstate.
Yep.
And pickup trucks.
So that opened the door to help Mario Cuomo win the Democratic primary upstate because Koch insulted an entire region. You know, I don't think you have that same kind of opportunity for in the AG's race. And, you know, so that's one distinct difference between then and now.
Yeah, but I have a Democrat in my household. So we've been monitoring what kind of voter contact we've seen. In our household, we have gotten nothing, no mail, no phone calls from Eric Schneiderman.
Really?
No phone calls, no mail from Kathleen Rice. 7 mailings from Richard Brodsky, 2 mailings from Sean Coffey, and 4 phone calls from Sean Coffey.
Wow. Why didn't you tell me this earlier?
You didn't ask.
I'm so sorry.
So, I mean, I think Eric Schneiderman's strategy is to ignore upstate completely, to focus on turnout in the city. And we know that turnout is going to be the highest in the city. It always is for a Democratic primary, but this year I think even more. There are a number of hotly contested local primary races.
Right.
Schneiderman's Senate district, Charlie Rangel's congressional district, Carolyn Maloney's congressional district, Pedro Espada's Senate seat. There are Democratic primaries throughout the city for Assembly, Senate, and Congress. That's where the majority of the turnout is going to come.
Okay, so to that end, let's talk about turnout on the other side of the aisle than on the Republican side for a minute. Can turnout in Western New York win Carl Palladino the primary for governor, the GOP primary?
I think it certainly has the possibility to do that. I think the turnout in the Republican primary is going to be a little higher than the Democratic side. 20 to 25% would be my guesstimate.
I think that's high, too.
Well, maybe. But you have 3 primaries there. You have governor and you have 2 U.S. Senate primaries.
That's true. Yep.
And a bunch of local primaries around the Republican primaries around the state as well for congressional and legislative offices. So I think it'll be higher than the Democratic primary. But there is no doubt that a heavy upstate, and particularly in upstate Western New York, and the real wild card for me in the Republican race is the Tea Party activists. Those who support the Tea Party movement, and they're not organized, if they turn out, that helps Palladino.
Right, and the property tax issue on Long Island, I mean, you would think that Long Island would be okay for Lazio, but he hasn't represented that area in quite some time. And Palladino, I mean, his ads, I mean, last week we ended the show by joking that he should be on the air, on radio and TV, and not talking to you.
Lo and behold.
Right, no, he should be limiting his uncontrolled communications with the press and the public, like media interviews where you never know what he's going to say, and he should stick to what he can say in a TV and a radio ad. And his TV and his radio ads, are very effective at, tapping into voter anger about taxes and
They're
spending.
very
and
straightforward, though.
politicians
Not
the line.
fancy, no bells and whistles.
No,
nothing,
it's
just very straightforward.
They're right out of network.
But
Yep.
for Republican primary voters, you don't need the bells and whistles.
No, that's
Interestingly,
exactly
what you
what it is.
have there is you have the two Republicans racing to the right, and then as soon as the primary is over, they're going to have to try and quickly dance
The
back to the
exact
center.
opposite of the Attorney General's
Exactly.
primary. Yeah, it is interesting. And also, when you talk about those races, those down ballot races that might drive turnout, you have a hotly contested congressional race on Long Island, in which the state GOP chairman's son is competing. That's in the 1st congressional district, and you've got another one in New York 23, and we've actually done some reporting on that here. And that Tea Party factor might actually be in play in that one.
You bet. But Steve, I think Lazio, if he wins the primary, is going to run to the middle. I think Palladino's going to stay right where he is.
That may be, and we're looking, the dynamics different there anyway, because we're most likely looking at a three-way governor's race, no matter who wins the Republican primary. But as you know, Liz, Sienna is in the midst of doing polling on that right now, and we will be out with a pre-primary poll on both of them.
There's the plug.
It had to come.
Yes, I know. Let me just ask you this. Where's Andrew Cuomo in all of this? I do not expect him to weigh in on an AG favorite. Do you?
100 years ago, when I was in the press corps, we used to ask Mario Cuomo all the time who he was going to endorse in various Democratic primaries. And he went into a huge litany about how it wouldn't be right for him to pick a favorite in a Democratic Party primary. And I think Andrew's got that same gene. I mean, why should he pick a favorite or try to endorse somebody in a five-way race where no one's really got traction, and then risk take a chance on having back the loser?
Steve?
I agree. I mean, I think Andrew Cuomo is making noises behind the scenes with people, making it clear who he would want to see and trying to help that person behind the scenes. But I assume there will be no Andrew Cuomo fingerprints on that help, and so that he can say, look, I intend to endorse the Democratic nominee, whoever he or she is.
Because Andrew knows what it means to have an attorney general who's hostile to the governor, because he was one. So I don't think he wants an attorney general, his lawyer, who's got a political vendetta against him.
Last word, Bob. Oh, last word, Bob. Unless you can make it really quick.
But he also knows how important it is to have a popular governor candidate endorse him, because that's what happened 4 years ago when Spitzer.
After the primary.
Exactly.
After the primary.
Exactly. And I think that's what we'll see.
There. Thank you very much, Steve Greenberg. Bob Bellafiore, it's always fun. I appreciate it.